They say trauma surgeons learn how to shut things out. But nothing in med school prepares you for a text like that. My name is Dr. Thomas Vance. I'm 38. I live in Chicago and I spend more hours in the trauma bay than I do in my own bed. It was just after 3 a.m. when my shift ended. 16 hours in the ER, half of it spent pulling glass out of a motorcyclist's thigh, the rest in a blur of gunshots and heart monitors. I was in the locker room pulling on a clean shirt when my phone buzzed. A message from Julia, my wife, or at least the woman I used to think of as my wife. Julia, we're fine. Please don't worry about the kids. That was it? No, how are you? No, we miss you. Just sterile detachment. We'd been married for nearly 20 years and these days our conversations had devolved into scheduling dentist appointments and forwarding school updates. Somewhere along the line, love got replaced with logistics. I stared at the message, my fingers frozen over the screen. No emojis. No warmth. Just another reminder that things had changed since my promotion. When I became chief of trauma, she didn't throw a party or even raise a glass. She had smiled, said that's nice, then went back to scrolling through Zillow listings in neighborhoods we'd never live in. I chalked it up to stress fatigue. After all, she'd raised our kids while I worked nights, weekends, holidays. Ava's ballet recital? Missed it. Jordan's spelling bee? Watched it on video. I kept telling myself I was doing it for them. But lately, I wasn't so sure they remembered. I slumped onto the bench, cracked my neck, and unlocked my phone again. Another text popped in. My heart dropped the moment I read it. Julia, I didn't want you to find out like this, but it's done. I remarried last week. Brandon is their legal guardian now. The kids have taken his last name. We're not coming back to the house. There it was. Like a scalpel through the ribs. I didn't react. Not outwardly. My hands didn't shake. I didn't shout. I just stared at the screen, reread the message, and typed one word. Me, understood. Then I stood up, slipped my stethoscope over my neck, and walked calmly toward the trauma bay. The paramedics were rolling in a 4-victim pileup from I-90. One of them coded in the hallway. I jumped in without missing a beat. Chest compressions, intubation, blood orders. My mind slipped into autopilot, the one place Julia couldn't reach. But inside? Inside something tore wide open. And still, I kept going. Because when everything you built collapses, sometimes all you can do is hold someone else together. It would be a long time before I cried. For now, there was too much to repair. Starting with the bleeding heart in bed 7. 2 days later, I was in the OR, wrist-deep in a thoracotomy when my pager buzzed. Dr. Vance, the nurse said as she handed me a clamp, your phone's been ringing nonstop. I nodded without looking up. Silence it. The patient made it through, barely. 23 years old. Gunshot wound, left chest. No exit. When I finally peeled off my gloves and stepped into the hallway, I was running on fumes. I took the elevator down to the physician's lounge and checked my voicemail. 7 messages. Most were from my sister, Karen. 2 from my lawyer. I started with Karen. Her voice was tight, breathless. Tom. You need to call me. Julia showed up to Mom's house. She brought some guy, Brandon Holt. Said he's her husband now. Told Mom and the neighbors he's the kid's new father. Introduced himself like some celebrity. Said he's moving them into a better environment. What the hell is going on? I closed my eyes. Better environment. Right? Another message played. He told Ava to call him Dad. In front of Mom. Jordan walked out of the room. She says they're going to change schools already enrolled. You need to fix this. Please. I moved on to my lawyer's voicemail. These somehow were worse. Thomas, it's Greg. We got paperwork today, custody waivers and joint asset transfers. Signatures look like yours. They're not. I've sent them to forensics, but it's clear someone's been forging documents in your name. We also have multiple mortgage applications with your name and social listed. One of them is active. I approved last week. Address matches your old house. I stood there frozen, watching the walls breathe. Greg's voice returned in a second message. This Brandon Holt, we ran a preliminary check. He's a developer on paper. But he's been involved in 3 failed projects in Florida and Colorado. Bankruptcies. Foreclosure disputes. He's currently under investigation for real estate fraud in Arizona. Thomas, he's using your name. You need to come in. Now. I didn't sit down. I didn't panic. I just walked to the locker room, sat on the bench, and opened my laptop. 10 minutes later, I pulled up court records, debt ledgers, and property filings. There it was, my name, my signature, my supposed consent on 3 separate mortgage contracts. All within the past 6 months. They were using my license, my history, even the equity I'd built in the old family home to pad some scheme. And the kids? They were part of the illusion. A ready-made family. A new name on the mailbox. Then my phone rang. Julia. I answered. Thomas, she said, her voice high, tight, please don't freak out. I know everything, I said calmly. The mortgages. The forged custody waivers. Brandon Holt's bankrupt record. His investigation. I know. Silence. Then, we were just trying to create stability. For the kids. I almost laughed. You used their identities. You erased mine. That's not stability. She was still talking when I hung up. Then I called Greg. We're not just filing suit, I told him. We're freezing everything. Custody, assets, credit lines. I want this airtight. Greg didn't ask why. He just said understood. I ended the call. Outside, the ER loudspeaker echoed a trauma alert. But first, I had one more message to send. To Julia. Me, you have 72 hours to get out of my house. Or I'll have Holt served in front of the kids. She didn't reply. But I knew she read it. I flew into Boston under the guise of hospital consulting work. On paper, I was advising on trauma protocol for a surgical center downtown. In reality, I was here for something else. Karen picked me up from the airport and didn't ask questions. She knew better. You sure you want to stay in town? She asked as we pulled away from the terminal. I nodded. Colleague offered a guest house in Brookline. Quiet. No ties. She didn't press further. By evening, I was seated across from my lawyer in his private office. Greg looked older since I last saw him. Maybe that's just what betrayal does to people. We start noticing cracks we usually overlook. They used your former address for all of it, Greg said, pushing a stack of folders across the table. Loan documents, development plans, even investor packets. They've been selling shares of a fake housing project based in your old neighborhood under your name. I opened the file and flipped through photos of property flyers and contract letters. All of it had my signature. None of it was real. They called it Vance Estates, Greg added, his voice dry. Subtle. My jaw tensed. Who bought in? He paused. That's the worst part. He turned his monitor toward me and clicked open a spreadsheet. Names rolled by familiar ones. Orderlies, nurses, techs from my former hospital. The receptionist who lost her husband last fall. A single mother from pediatric recovery. These are our people, I said quietly. Greg nodded. Julia had access to hospital HR databases. Address histories, financial stress indicators, dependent statuses. They were targeting vulnerable staff, selling them shares in properties that don't exist. I sat back in the chair. My throat was tight, but I stayed composed. She used my job, I said. My hospital. My title. Greg added, and your face. She included family photos in some of the investor packets. Framed you as a silent partner, stable, trustworthy, highly respected. I looked at the screen again. Jordan's school portrait stared back at me from a flyer titled Legacy Housing for Healthcare Families. That's when the dam started to crack. I stood up, pacing the edge of the office. They didn't just ruin my life, I said. They're bleeding people who trusted me. Greg leaned forward. You still want to go for custody? I didn't hesitate. I'll be collecting my kids, I said. Personally. Greg gave a slow nod. Then we need to move fast. I want a list of every family who invested. Every dollar that changed hands. You planning on confrontation? No, I said. I'm planning surgery. Greg raised an eyebrow. And when this is over, I added, I want to cauterize every last wound they left behind. We shook hands. Then I grabbed the files and walked out into the night. The gloves were off. It was a cold Thursday afternoon when I pulled into the neighborhood I used to call home. The lawn was still freshly cut, the shutters painted a bright slate blue, Julia's aesthetic all over. From my car, I could see Brandon Holt standing at the kitchen island, stirring something in a stainless steel pot like he belonged there. His shirt was crisp, collar popped. He looked like a real estate brochure come to life. Ava sat at the counter. Her shoulders were stiff. She picked at the corner of a workbook, not really looking at him. Jordan was nowhere in sight. I watched from the next block, parked behind a row of dormant maple trees. Their leaves had all dropped, exposing the bones of the street, bare branches, empty sidewalks. The kind of stillness that makes people believe everything's fine. But I knew better. The next day, I intercepted Ava after school. She walked out with her headphones in, arms tucked into her jacket, eyes low. I waited until she passed the oak tree near the corner, the one she used to call the hiding place when she was 6. Ava, I said softly. She froze mid-step. Her head snapped up. Dad? I nodded, careful not to move too fast. For a moment she didn't speak. Just stared at me like she wasn't sure if I was real. Then she ran into my arms with a force that almost knocked me off balance. Dad, she whispered into my coat. You came back. I never left, I said, pressing my hand gently against the back of her head. When she pulled away, her eyes were already wet. He makes me call him Dad, she said. Brandon. He says it's disrespectful if I don't. My throat tightened. And do you? She looked down. Only when Julia's in the room. That name Julia. Not Mom. She added, he says I need to forget what came before. What do you want? I asked. To remember, she said, eyes shining. That night, I found Jordan behind the skate park off Maynard Street, sitting alone on the ramp with a basketball wedged between his sneakers. He was taller now, angrier too. But he didn't flinch when I approached. Hey, I said. He looked up slowly. Took you long enough? I sat beside him. Sorry. He shrugged, but not in a dismissive way. They said you gave up. Said you walked away? I didn't, I said. He turned his face away, jaw clenched. I knew they were lying. I've been working on fixing it. Brandon told the principal to change my emergency contact, he muttered. Said you weren't coming back. I looked at him carefully. Do you believe him? He wiped his nose with his sleeve. Not anymore. Then, without warning, he leaned against me, shoulder to shoulder. Just enough to let me know the fire hadn't gone out. They changed our last names, he said quietly. On the school records, the mail. Everything. I know. But I didn't want to, he said quickly. They said we had to, but Ava and I didn't want to. You don't have to explain, I told him. He nodded, looking straight ahead. After a long silence, he asked, what happens now? I reached into my jacket and handed him a folded sheet of paper, court filings. Emergency custody motion. The first step. We're going home, I said. Jordan's grip on the paper tightened. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. A few minutes later, I dropped both kids off at a friend's house. Karen had made arrangements. Before they went inside, Ava hugged me again. You're still our dad, she whispered. Jordan didn't hug me. He just said, next time you hit him, aim for the jaw. And with that, they stepped into the doorway. I stayed out front for a minute longer. The war wasn't over. But the heart of it? That was already won. 3 days later, I walked into the break room at County General and sat across from Cassandra Lyles, a respiratory tech whose face still looked shell-shocked. You gave Brandon Holt $5,000? I asked, keeping my voice calm. She nodded. It was supposed to be a deposit on a healthcare equity starter home. Julia showed me the folder in the hospital lounge. Said they were prioritizing single-parent staff. How many others? Cassandra took a deep breath. I know at least 4 people in my department. Maybe more in nursing. No one's talked about it out loud, everyone's embarrassed. I showed her a list. Do these names look familiar? She scanned the page. Yeah, all of them. Brandon ran a whole info session in the basement of the church next to the hospital. Said you were backing it. I clenched my jaw. I wasn't. She looked down. I figured that out when the website stopped working. It was time. That afternoon, I called Greg and told him to greenlight the confrontation plan. I wasn't going to let this rot spread behind closed doors. On Sunday, Brandon was scheduled to host a preview open house for Vance Estates at my former home, no less. The listing said exclusive walkthroughs for verified investors. I made sure they got more than that. We coordinated with 5 of the affected hospital staff. Cassandra, 2 nurses, a janitor named Ray, and a surgical scheduler who'd paid $3,000 in cash. They all agreed to show up, no yelling, no signs. Just presence. Greg sent a process server. I hired a videographer. At precisely 2 p.m., Brandon opened the door in his signature polo and toothy real estate grin. Julia stood beside him, clipboard in hand like some well-oiled assistant. She still wore the wedding band I paid for, ironically. They welcomed the first few guests, handing out glossy brochures with my name stamped across the bottom. Then came Ray. Hi, Brandon, Ray said. I brought a few friends. Brandon smiled. Fantastic, welcome to A. Then he saw Cassandra. And Denise from pediatrics. Then 2 more from surgical support. Then a process server stepping right up to his chest. You've been served, she said coolly, sliding the envelope into his frozen hands. Julia's mouth fell open. The videographer stepped in, catching Brandon's bewildered expression on camera. His pitch book slipped from under his arm. One of the guests pointed to the brochure. Is Dr. Vance still involved? She asked innocently. I think you should leave, Brandon stammered. Julia's face turned red as her eyes darted toward the street where a second camera crew was filming. Shut it down, she hissed, grabbing Brandon's arm. Now. But it was too late. The guests, real and planted, began whispering. The illusion was cracking. Brandon panicked, slamming the door shut, forgetting the camera was still rolling. By nightfall, word had spread. Videos were circulating inside private hospital staff groups. A few clips had already made it to real estate forums. At 7:38 p.m., Julia called me. "You planned this," she spat. "You humiliated us." I leaned back in my chair. "No, Julia," I said calmly. "You did that the moment you forged my name. You don't get to destroy everything." "I'm not destroying it. I'm documenting it." "You're evil." "I'm precise." Silence. Then I added, "Remove Brandon from my house. Tonight. Or the next time this happens, it'll be on local news." Click. Within the hour, Greg filed for emergency custody and initiated an asset freeze. The house, the accounts, the insurance filings. By midnight, Julia's car was gone from the driveway. The net was closing in. The FBI called me on a Monday morning just after rounds. I was finishing up notes on a ruptured spleen when my burner phone buzzed. "Dr. Vance? This is Special Agent Dorsey. We'd like to meet. It's regarding Brandon Holt." I didn't ask how they got my number. I just said when and where. We met in a windowless federal office near Logan Airport. 2 agents, 1 male, 1 female. Neat suits. Stern eyes. They already had a thick file open when I walked in. "Brandon Holt is currently under federal investigation," Agent Dorsey said. "We've identified over 30 fraudulent property contracts tied to his shell companies." "And the hospital angle?" I asked. The second agent, a woman named Lou, nodded. "Your ex-wife, Julia Vance, or Julia Holt now, used her admin-level hospital access to pull employee data. Income, addresses, even HR stress flags. She created a hit list," I said. "Essentially, yes." "Was I the first target?" "You were the foundation," Agent Lou said. "Your name gave them legitimacy." I exhaled slowly. "What do you want from me?" "We're planning arrests," Dorsey said. "We're executing 2 warrants this Friday morning. One at your former home. One at Julia's workplace. Can I be there?" The agents exchanged a look. "You're a civilian," Lou said carefully. "But given your direct involvement, we'll allow it. You'll have to stay in the observation van." "That's fine," I said. Before I left, I gave them one last instruction. "My children. They're currently under temporary guardianship with my sister. I want emergency custody today." By noon, I had filed the paperwork. Karen was pre-approved. If anything went wrong, the kids wouldn't end up in some limbo. Friday arrived like a scalpel's edge, sharp and sterile. At 5:42 a.m., I sat in an unmarked surveillance van parked half a block from the house I used to own. A team of agents in windbreakers waited near the side yard. Agent Lou sat beside me, headset on, voice low. "We go in 3 minutes." I didn't respond. My eyes were locked on the kitchen window. Brandon emerged in his pajamas, yawning. The man who replaced me, standing in my house, barefoot and smug. Then the call came through. "Execute." The team moved fast, silent, professional. 2 agents through the front, 1 through the side gate. Within seconds, Brandon was face down on the floor. Cuffed. Disarmed. No resistance. I didn't feel triumph. Just cold clarity. At 7:15 a.m., a second team arrested Julia in the staff parking lot at the hospital. She barely had time to remove her badge. By 10, I was sitting in family court. The emergency hearing was swift, undeniable evidence, clear risk to the minors. At 11:37 a.m., the judge signed the order. I walked out holding 2 signed copies, one for school, one for travel. By noon, Ava and Jordan were in the back seat of Karen's SUV, fast food in hand, laughing about something only they understood. I got in the passenger seat, turned back to them, and said, "We're going home." They didn't ask which one. Because they already knew. The detention center smelled like bleach and despair. I'd been here once before, years ago, consulting on emergency medical policy for correctional facilities. I remembered thinking how sterile it all felt. Not just the halls. The people. Brandon Holt looked smaller in an orange jumpsuit. He was seated behind the plexiglass divider, hands folded, eyes hollow. No real estate swagger now? No tailored blazers or cologne masking desperation. Just a man caught in his own design. The guard stepped back, leaving us alone with only a fixed surveillance camera blinking in the corner. Brandon picked up the phone first. "You came," he said, voice hoarse. I took my time before lifting the receiver. "You asked." He leaned forward, elbows on the ledge. "I wanted to apologize." I said nothing. "I messed up. I know that. I didn't realize how deep this would go." I raised an eyebrow. "You forged my signature on 3 mortgage contracts. You stood in my kitchen and told my daughter to call you Dad. Don't insult me by pretending you were confused." His jaw tightened. "Julia said you'd moved on. That I abandoned them?" He looked down. "Something like that." I kept my voice level. "You didn't just take my name. You took my place, and then used it to rob people who trusted that name. Nurses, techs, admins who'd never recover from the kind of losses you were dealing out like candy. He tried to meet my eyes. I didn't let him. I want to cooperate, he said quickly. I'll testify. Against Julia. Against everyone. I'll give you names, emails, wire logs. I need help. I leaned in slightly. You're worried about prison. His voice cracked. I've heard what happens. To people like me. Fraud, sure. But using kids? Lying to their faces? Pretending to be someone you're not. He rubbed his forehead. They said I might get federal time. Years. You will, I said. I'm begging you, he said, quieter now. If you talk to the feds, tell them I cooperated early. That I'm helping. I looked at him then, really looked. This wasn't remorse. This was damage control. You'll testify, I said. Under oath. Recorded. If I hear one lie, one hesitation, I'll make sure your sentencing includes the maximum enhancement for identity-based fraud. He swallowed hard. Deal, he said. I stood to leave. You should be more careful with whose life you try to steal, Brandon. He pressed his hand to the glass. You're not what I expected. I stopped at the door. No, I said. I'm not a surgeon because I know how to save people. I'm a surgeon because I know exactly where to cut. As I walked out, I heard the click of the deadbolt behind me. Brandon Holt tried to replace a man who gave everything to his family. What he got in return was a surgical reckoning. And I wasn't done yet. 6 months passed. Summer turned to fall and the first leaves had begun to curl on the sidewalks when I returned to the detention center. Not because I wanted to, but because Brandon Holt's lawyer said he had something new, something that couldn't wait. I wore my coat inside. I wasn't staying long. Brandon looked worse this time. Thinner. Greasy hair. That caged animal look most men develop in confinement when the reality sets in. There's no version of this that ends on their terms. He didn't bother with pleasantries. She knew everything, he said the second I sat down. Julia. I'm aware. No, he shook his head. Not just what we did together. She planned it. She created the funnel system, segmented the victims by salary and credit score. She was the one who told me to use your name. She said it gave the project credibility. He slid a folder through the slot in the plexiglass. Notes, emails, printouts of messages from Julia. None of them surprised me. But they sealed everything. She targeted people like her, he added. Other nurses. Admins. She knew what would make them trust her. Empathy is leverage, I said quietly. He nodded. I'll testify to all of it. I didn't thank him. This wasn't charity. It was strategy. His own attempt at sentence reduction before the hammer dropped. As I stood to leave, he asked, You really think she'll do time? She's already doing it, I said. This just ensures she won't stop. That afternoon, I walked into the courthouse and handed the entire file to the federal prosecutor. By morning, Julia's bail agreement had been revoked. Her early release petition denied. Her nursing license? Revoked permanently within 48 hours. The board ruling came down fast and hard. Unethical conduct. Breach of trust. Conspiracy to defraud. And the best part? The ruling was public. Her name wasn't just struck from a registry. It was carved into a wall of disgrace. 2 days later, I got a letter. Not from Julia directly. From her attorney. She wanted permission to send letters to the kids. She thought maybe with time they'd understand. Maybe they'd want to hear from her. Maybe I could help that happen. I didn't hesitate. I declined. No letters. No birthday cards. No shadow attempts at guilt dressed up as affection. They could decide when they turned 18. Until then, silence. Later that night, I sat at my desk with the file Brandon had given me. I read every line, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to feel it. The full weight of what she'd done. Then I opened my journal, the one I hadn't touched since Ava's last school play. The one Julia used to call my coping ritual. I picked up a pen and wrote just one line. Family restored. No forgiveness required. I closed the book and placed it back in the drawer. I wasn't angry anymore. But I wasn't interested in redemption either. Some people cross a line and never get to come back. Not because you hate them, but because you finally understand what it costs to keep bleeding for someone who never bothered to stop the knife. The house was mine again. Legally, emotionally, down to the faded paint on the porch swing I'd once promised to replace and never did. It was a crisp autumn evening. The kind of night when the air feels honest. Jordan stood in the yard throwing a baseball against the side of the garage. The thunk-thunk of leather and siding had become a familiar rhythm. Ava was inside at the piano, playing slowly, tentatively. She'd been relearning a piece she abandoned during the chaos. She didn't say much these days, but she didn't flinch when I hugged her either. That was enough. I sat on the steps with a mug of tea, letting the steam work its way into my fingers. Karen had just called. She's asking again, she said. Julia. She wants to send birthday cards this year. I didn't even pause. No. She said she just wants to be remembered. She forfeited that right. Karen didn't argue. She just said, thought you want to know, and hung up. That was the difference between people who truly care and those who just say they do. Karen never pushed. She made room, not pressure. I watched Jordan miss a catch and chase the ball down the driveway, mumbling something I pretended not to hear. When he looked back, I gave him a thumbs up. Inside, Ava hit a wrong note and stopped. Then she tried again. And this time she kept going. I hadn't written in my journal since the day I blocked Julia's mail access. But tonight, something pulled me toward it. I sat at the dining table, no food, just the weight of a pen, and flipped back through the last few entries. Family restored. No forgiveness required. I read it again. Still true. Still necessary. Some people asked how I moved on so quickly. They didn't understand that it wasn't quick, it was surgical. You find the infection. You isolate it. You remove what's killing the healthy tissue. You stitch what's left and let it scar. You never forget the pain. But you learn to live through it. Jordan walked in a few minutes later, panting slightly, glove in hand. You good? I asked. He shrugged. Ball's getting heavy. You want to stop? He thought for a second, then shook his head. Just wanted to know if you'd come throw a few with me. I stood, grabbed my coat. Yeah, I said. I would. On our way out, Ava called from the piano room, play after dinner? Promise, I said. I shut the journal, left it on the table. The last thing I'd written stayed at the top of the page, unchallenged. Family restored. But before I followed Jordan into the yard, I added one more line beneath it. Some scars aren't meant to fade. They're meant to remind. Out on the porch, the sun dipped low behind the trees. Jordan tossed me the ball. I caught it clean. Ava's piano music played faintly behind us. The trauma doctor was gone for the night. The father stayed.